Namaste. Welcome to this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology, brought to you by Twashtri Learning and Research Center. Twashtri is a mental health startup in Bangalore, India, which is pioneering to bring traditional Indian knowledge systems and amalgamating it with modern psychological processes to provide holistic healing for mental health needs. In this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology, I am your facilitator, Rupali Das, an ex-assistant professor of Delhi University and an ex-senior research fellow from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. My area of expertise lies in Indian psychology and counseling psychology. I am the head counseling psychologist at Twashtri Center. In this course on Indian psychology, we will be covering what is Indian psychology, how is it different from the other paradigms of psychology, what are the basic assumptions of Indian psychology, how does it view the human psyche, and what are the possible contributions of Indian psychology into the area of mental health. So come, let's begin. So the first question we want to ask is, what is Indian psychology? So before we answer that question, what is Indian psychology, we'll answer what is not Indian psychology. A commonplace misconception about Indian psychology is it is the study of the cultural beliefs of the people of India that shape their behavior. Now, if you look into this definition, in itself it refers to the domain of cultural and cross-cultural psychology, where you study the cultural beliefs of a group of people and how it influences their behavior. In this sense, Indian psychology is not about the cultural belief, but in itself represents a paradigm of inquiry that has its own questions about what is reality and how is reality perceived. Indian psychology has its roots in the Indian philosophy, which derives from the ancient school of Veda. Now, Veda in itself means with or to know. The inquiry of the ancient civilization to know about the world, about the reality of the being and the cosmos and the universe, envelops itself into this ancient text or scripture that we call as Vedas. We will talk more about the Vedas and their different we will talk more about the different Vedas which were later, the Vedas which were later divided into different parts based on the different, what they were dealing with. But right now we are going to talk about what is Indian psychology and what is not Indian psychology. If you read the book by Psychology in Indian Tradition by Professor Ramakrishna Rao and Professor Anand Paranjpe, they very clearly highlight this difference between cultural psychology and Indian psychology, where Indian psychology evolves from the ethos of the Indian philosophical system, whereas psychology in India or in the way cultural beliefs are studied is more of a part of cultural psychology. One of the examples that we can take is of the Chipko movement, which is a very famous movement in most of India and Indian history, where the people of a particular community, the Bahuguna community, worshipped the forest, and hence they shared a relationship with the forest which determined their socio-cultural relationship. Now, this particular example or this particular scenario can be studied in two ways. One, studying the culture, what kind of relationship do these people share with the forest, in what sense. So you can study it either from a behaviorist perspective, in which you ask question, okay, what is the kind of reinforcement that is being created here in terms of behavior. Man protects forest and the forest in return provides him or her with the basic necessities. So that is kind of a conditioning which is created. On the other hand, you can also study it from a psychoanalytical point of view, maybe perhaps how the people of the community had identified themselves with the nature, with the trees, and through that identification derived their sense of self from that trees. So all of this is a study of the phenomena from the current psychological models, namely behaviorism or psychoanalysis, but looking at the cultural milieu of India. This is not Indian psychology. What is Indian psychology then? Indian psychology would be understanding why to worship the forest in the first place. We have the concept of a yaksha, the deity that reigns over or protects the consciousness of the forest. The deity here, the yaksha, is itself representing a being of a higher consciousness that pervades over the entire consciousness of the forest. Some of you who might have seen the movie Kantara would be able to associate to it. So when we start talking in terms of consciousness, in terms of higher energy, in terms of the different levels of consciousness, where nature in itself is one representation of the consciousness, and the human being and all the animals, living beings at the different levels of manifestation of this consciousness, then we are talking in terms of Indian psychology, right? So that is one fundamental difference to look out for, what is Indian psychology and what is not. When we talk about a paradigm, then what is a paradigm? A paradigm is a set of basic assumptions that any field has that informs its inquiry about the field, in the sense that these assumptions are about what is reality, what is the relationship between the reality and the knower, and how do we know it. So these are the three fundamental questions that we ask in any paradigm. The first is an ontological assumption, which is about what is reality, what do you believe is reality. A lot of modern science is based on a positivistic paradigm of reality, which says that reality is out there. It is positivistic, as well as some part of science is also reductionistic, in the sense that it reduces the entire reality in terms of just matter. But we know from modern science, especially quantum physics, that matter is perhaps not the fundamental reality, and when you start going within the layers of matter, you find quarks, you find other nano particle aspects of matter which are just whirling energy. So then we understand perhaps matter has dual nature, matter has energy within it which is governing the reality. However, most of science, the approach it takes is of a positivistic paradigm, where reality is out there and I am able to make some changes or manipulate this reality in order to experiment with it and then study it further, right? So whatever can be experienced and whatever can be manipulated is what the science would take as reality. The second question is, the second assumption is about epistemology. Now epistemology means what is the relationship between the knower and the known. So if I call something as reality, if I perceive an object as, let's say this is a finger, right? That's how, or this is a ring, let's put it this way. This is a ring. How do I experience this ring? I can touch it, I can probably weigh it, or I can check the dimensions of this ring, and I can understand, or I can study this ring. The relationship here is more of an object versus subject, where I am looking at the ring and there are definite measurements which will not change over the period of time. It's more objective in nature. On the other hand, there can also be an inquiry of how does this ring feel in my hand. So it might be a little tight, it might be a little loose, and this is a more subjective inquiry. So this will come when my first ontological presumption, unlike the positivist paradigm, if I go to more towards the social constructivist paradigm, which posits that reality is not objective in nature, but how we perceive it defines the reality. In the sense, if I call this as golden color, then this becomes golden. But tomorrow, if by norm we change the name of the color, we start calling it silver, then perhaps my perception of reality will change here and I'll call it silver, and it will depend on my perception of reality, not so much so what is the object of reality. So you see how the two major assumptions we are talking about fundamentally shifts as we move from one paradigm to the other paradigm. The last question is about methodologies. Once I know what is real, once I know what is my relationship with that reality, the last question is, how do I inquire it? How do I study it? Again, based on the paradigm, the methodologies will change. So if I believe that reality is out there, I can manipulate it in particular ways and study it, I will use a methodology which is more experimental in nature, where I change the variables and look at the results and believe the results will be consistent over time, assuming that this particular entity is not changing, the other side is not changing. The second way would be when I believe that reality is here, my perception of reality is governing my reality, then my methodology of inquiring about it would also change. Perhaps one of the methodology that I can use it, how did you perceive the ring today versus how did you perceive the ring after 1 week or 1 month? That is a fundamental shift in the methodology. That is a very basic overview of paradigm in general. So whenever we are talking about a new knowledge system or a different knowledge system than something we are used to of, we talk in terms of paradigms. Most of the psychology, mainstream psychology that we study today in Barron or the other general psychology or other psychology books, comes largely from the positivistic outlook of modern science. Indian psychology, on the other hand, has a very unique and a very different approach to this paradigm. To understand this, we will first refer to a very small story from the Mundaka Upanishad, which talks about two birds on a tree. One bird which is enjoying the fruits of the tree, the other one sits above and witnesses. He himself doesn't enjoy the fruits, but witnesses the other one, its friend, down enjoying the fruit of the tree. The one who is enjoying the fruit of the tree is Anish. He's called Anish because he is not the Ishvara or the one who has control or knowledge of himself. The one sitting above is called the Ishvara, the one witnessing conscious who has the knowledge of himself. The Upanishad further elaborates. The Upanishad further goes on to say that there are two male unborn and one female unborn. This refers to the two male, to the two birds who is the soul and the divine, the Jivatma and the Paramatma. And the one female represents the tree, the nature, Prakriti, who are the unborn. What does it mean to be unborn? It means to be unborn that they are in constant cyclic nature. They are constantly moving. They are born and yet unborn. And all of this, it happens in the context of the Paramatma above, who is witnessing the witnessing consciousness, the Jivatma and the nature.